So Vivek, I'd like to basically ask you, I read a report on PwC which suggests that enterprises are just getting started with cloud technologies, right? And as they say, it is the end of a new beginning. The groundwork has been laid, the infrastructure has been laid, the data centers have already started adapting into new age data centers, and for generic purpose applications or for specific applications, right? And now is the time for leveraging all this investment and moving into the next phase. So I would like to ask you on what's your view of cloud and data center adoption by the BFSI segment?
But just to take a step back and probably I'll just touch upon a couple of thoughts on why the adoption is positive. Is there a tipping point or not? What are the inhibitors, so to speak, right? So, and you did mention fintech. So if there is a fintech or a startup which is just coming into setting up a business, cloud does offer a very attractive proposition. It reduces your capex. You can defer your investment at a long point in time. It takes away the overhead of infrastructure setup and management. You can also use it as a service on the cloud. So as a lean organization, you're not caught up into a lot of nitty-gritties, right? So it gives you a lot of flexibility. The barriers of entry into business have reduced because of cloud. So I think all those factors make it attractive for a new entrant to adopt it, right? But if you're an existing organization, and when we work with banks, each bank has got anywhere between 100 to 200 odd systems that it would work with, big and small. The critical systems could be between 10 to 15, but big and small, that's the gamut of systems you have. Even if I do a simple, let's say an ATM withdrawal, behind the scenes, close to 15 systems would have got touched while that transaction happens, right? The reason I'm taking that as an example is, now if I'm migrating from whatever my current setup is into cloud, I have to then work out all these interfaces and nitty-gritties before I move it on. I have to figure out what the touch points are, how will they behave, if something is on-prem, something is not on-prem, how will it smoothly transact across both, how will it cross those both barriers, how will authentication work. So all those are fine-grained points, and especially when we are custodians of customers' money, and we would want to be very careful about it. So it's a pretty nuanced decision, so which is where even our report said is the end of a beginning, because so knowing to unravel this spaghetti, if I may, and just to have a strategy for it is the thinking process, and so the initial part of it is a little bit more measured, and that's what we have reached right now, right? But as we move forward, and here is a slightly different point of view than what you have heard about cloud, which is where I think the opportunity lies. If I had to pick up top two business case or use case for moving for it, right? So one clearly would be efficiency, whether it is cost, time, so on and so forth. Efficiency is a big story. The second is agility. The demands are changing. The business comes up with new requirements. There are month-end loads of processing, so we might want to ramp up, ramp down. So we want to be very agile, so it does support agility, right? But I think the third story, but both of them in my view are more of optimization stories, or which will either reduce your time or cost. But I think the possibility of it also allowing you to increase your revenues is what one should start thinking about.
Sure.
And probably again, borrowing from the fintechs, once you are on the cloud, you are part of a broader ecosystem. Your ability to engage with other similar ecosystems on the cloud on a quicker, faster basis is higher. And
sure.
More and more in the FS we are in right now, we are not working in isolation. We have to work with other parties within financial services and non-financial services. Will cloud allow us to do that more easily? The answer is yes, and that's the opportunity which is there on the table.
Sure. So I'll get back to you on that in a while, and we'll talk about that. But let's move on to Jyotir Lata B. I really want to ask you about your current data center and cloud environment. What kind of a data center setup do you have, right? And on that, I would like to ask you about what benefits does a hybrid data center bring in? And what are the challenges in your current setup, and what are your suggestions based on your experience?
I represent DHFL, which is in the housing finance domain. and especially into the affordable housing segment, which is actually in the verge of growth. If you see the government recent guidelines and the processes and all, it is really in the growth phase. So to go into that growth phase, we have taken up a huge digital transformation program in DHFL, which is not only including the business process reengineering and operational efficiency and all, but also it includes the complete application architecture revamp, which includes various different products. It's a completely replacing the legacy systems with a new stack. So if you see our journey, we initially started with, as most of the organizations do, it is a kind of traditional data center where we were owning the entire infrastructure. Management also was from our teams. It was actually, if you see, it's entirely managed by, it is in-house data center of DHFL. So when we have taken up this kind of digital transformation program, we have seen what kind of applications and what kind of application stacks are required and which are suitable in different domains. We have seen a huge benefit in going for the private cloud. There are especially two reasons. One is the security aspects, and also in banking and also in the NBFC domain, there is a national geographic limitations that regulations put. So based on that, we have segregated different applications which are suitable for private cloud. And there are certain applications like our mailing system and all, we found the public cloud would be the best solution for that. We have segregated, and then we have gone ahead with this public as well as the private cloud environment.
Milind is the General Manager IT at Saraswat Bank. And Milind, there's been news on Saraswat Bank moving into an omni-channel digital experience, right? So you've been driving various channels as mobile, net banking, Aadhaar-based systems, e-lobbies, etc., and gearing up your cloud and your data center investments to keep pace with that. Also, I understand there's convergence of communication channels such as audio, video, email, chat for faster communication and for cost savings. So, can you share your experience on that?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Akhil has mentioned, omni-channel experience, yes, that is a need of the hour, because the customer, whatever channel they use, whether they use in branch or they use the channel on digital platform or through e-lobbies, they expect a similar kind of services, features, so on and so forth. But the real challenge is to how to build all those things in a record time. So what we have done is we have taken a lot of initiatives. We have carved out a separate digital banking division, and we are taking it in accelerated mode. And while we are doing this, because from the customer point of view, the lines are blurred. Whether you are a cooperative bank, whether you are a public sector bank or a private bank, they expect similar kind of experience. So from that point of view, we are putting a lot of thrust onto our digital channels. We are ensuring that most of the banking services are inbuilt into these channels. Not only that, we also are bringing in other services like Aadhaar-based payment systems into that, because there are a lot of channels which are accepting Aadhaar-based payment systems or QR code-based systems. So that also is being brought in. And when you are doing all this, what happens is the data center investments, when you see the data center building or data center creation is a long time investments. And to keep on building the resources into the data center also takes a lot of time. So here we found that hybrid approach, going on to the cloud for some of the applications really helps, because then you are able to roll out faster. So that will happen, and I agree with Jyotirlata, some of the applications like email systems can be hosted on public clouds, and some of the applications where security is more concerns should be taken into private cloud.
Right. Thank you. Moving on, Abhijit Shah. So Abhijit is the CTO at DCB Bank. He's recently taken over this assignment in September 2017, and he was earlier with companies like Polaris, Wipro, interfacing with the BFSI segment. So outside the bank with technology companies and now within the bank really driving digital transformation and next generation initiatives. That's Abhijit Shah for you. So Abhijit, I want to understand on how do you think the data center and cloud would address the emerging digital business challenges or digital business models that we are coming across today. And also, I mentioned when we really started off that we are moving into a next generation data center, right? Or in fact, an overall next generation cloud compute. So, so what do you think is the future of cloud and data center?
Thanks, Akhil. If I take a top-down approach, I mean, you look at the digital disruption happening across the country with regards to the identity provider, the central identity provider being Aadhaar, then revamp of our payment with UPI. There are a lot of telecoms coming as banks, basically. There are a lot of identity providers whom we are kind of, banks are kind of adopting. There are fintech players in the market whom banks are adopting. If you look at ENY's survey, India is the second largest adopter of fintech community. Now, from a bank's perspective, if we try to look at what are the key priorities, we can look at customer 360 hyper-personalization. This becomes one of the important area where banks really wants to focus. Participating in disruptive business models, which are multi-entity business models for banks, that really becomes important. And third is improving their operational efficiency. Now, if you really look at the first point, that customer 360 and hyper-personalization is more driven by your data. And it's more about volume of data. And if it's volume of data, you need to really be looking at a kind of infrastructure that is going to handle this kind of a volume. Now, if you look at intent-based networks, basically, intent-based networking, which are kind of developed on SDN protocols, this is going to be the kind of future, I mean, where we have the infrastructure based on demand. So you have the capability to kind of scale up the infrastructure, the provisioning of infrastructure based on the kind of scale and the volume you're looking at. Second perspective is when you look at hyper-personalization, it's important the kind of churn, the kind of analysis and processing of data you do. Now, there are multiple devices enterprises kind of engage in, and then these devices are basically the edges. How do you make these edges intelligent? So getting intelligent edges become extremely important, where pre-processing of this data happens on the edge. So deploying the cloud-based computing power to these edges and making them more intelligent, and having that edge processing handle the data, the concatenating of data, processing of data, and deriving the sense of what decision it can lead to from a pre-processing perspective. And finally, when it comes to disruptive business models, a lot of compute-intense workloads, banks are looking at moving on to cloud. And some banks with AWS kind of setting up their data centers here in India and data not flowing out of our Indian borders. Banks are kind of getting into it where they are kind of rolling out the data into the public cloud and then getting the computation done out there and then getting it back within the bank's periphery. Now, this becomes really important when you kind of look at how seamless this should be. I mean, you have some workloads operating within the bank, some workloads operating in the public cloud. So having this seamless experience, you need a kind of a very robust API management platform. And then this API management platform kind of fueled with your microservices-based, serverless-based architecture. I think that's going to be the future.
Yeah, I think absolutely correct. And there's a phenomenal power of APIs when it really comes to banks exposing APIs, also relevant to the fintech community and all the developers, right? So banks exposing APIs, developers consuming those APIs and monetizing those services. We've definitely seen a fair amount of trend around that. Moving forward, Abhishek Chandra, he's the Chief Information Officer at IIFL Wealth and Asset Management Limited. IIFL is, like we all know, India Infoline Limited, which started, like most of these you know, finance companies start small, but it's grown to mammoth proportions today. Today, it's got a network of 3,000 locations spread over more than 500 towns and cities in India and some of the international markets like Dubai, New York, and Singapore. This company was in the news that it had hired a technology vendor to migrate some of its existing on-premise workloads into the cloud and to look at cloud orchestration. So, you know, that's what I want to ask you on, Abhishek, that can you share your experience of leveraging cloud, you know, whether it's public or private or hybrid clouds, in bringing efficiencies in a distributed environment?
So I feel one good thing which has happened is in each of the businesses, and I feel the CIO panel sitting here would appreciate that senior stakeholders in the organization have started accepting that the data security is going to be far higher at a cloud than trying to manage on your own. Because at the moment you start going to these core cloud service providers, they would be able to invest in data security much more. And I feel that has been one of the key factors. There's earlier always this concern, is my data actually going to be at risk the moment it starts going to cloud? So that journey I feel we all have now crossed. That question does not emerge anymore. What I see now is that we are now moving to the next phase on how we start adopting more things like a service. Right? So what I mean is that how do we get DR as a service? How do we get storage as a service? How do we get emails as a service? So it's not just about using the cloud infra, it's actually using the whole service gambit or the modus operandi or the operating model around that completely delivered to you, which helps the CIOs of the organization to more work with business and focus on revenue generating areas than trying to manage infra or the core part of the infra. And that's been a story for us. So today, like for example, with one of the service providers, we are assessing saying, how do we take our proxy servers on cloud? For our international locations. Why should we having, if there are users around 10, 15 users in international locations, why do we put proxy servers in each location? Why don't we take a proxy onto cloud? So those are the kinds of solutions we are working on.
Perfect, perfect. Thanks for that. And moving on, Ravi Kiran Mankikar, who's the Chief Information Officer at NKGSB Cooperative Bank Limited. So cooperative banks may have their own challenges on managing cloud and data center initiatives. And I want to ask you about your experience in managing data center and cloud-based initiatives for a cooperative bank.
See, today if we look at the cooperative sector as a whole, it forms virtually just 3% of the entire banking sector. And what I always say, we have to compete with the remaining 97%. And we are competing with the remaining 97%. We have to ensure that all the services, all the products which our fellow competing banks offer, we have to have them. And if we have to have them, and if we have to deliver at the speed at which the other players are giving, then we need to have a robust platform, both in terms of infrastructure as well as applications at the back end. And as a sector which is traditionally considered to be a weak sector, we won't have those kind of finances which are required to drive such kind of a requirement. And that is one of the main reasons why banks should normally go and adopt cloud. But unfortunately, in the cooperative sector, this is not happening. Because everyone prefers that they should have their own setup. And when they think of having their own setup, okay, the ills, I won't, is a very strong word for it, but the challenges which an own setup has, they have to live with it. Going for the cloud adoption, traditionally, if we have seen, I have not seen a bank putting their entire core banking applications on the cloud.
Sure.
It is typically the ancillary applications or those which are not so critical, which are hosted on the cloud model. Whereas on a shared or a hosted model, they will have their core applications in place.
So thanks. So I'd like to touch upon a couple of points that might have actually missed out during the discussion, and then we'll throw it open to a couple of questions. So one is that traditional banks have been averse to moving their data center into the clouds, right? So they've pretty much want to manage control over their existing data center investments. So I'd like to basically ask a couple of panelists out here, Vivek and Abhijit, probably would be the best to kind of think this through and answer it. On security, so what kind of applications do you feel can be moved into the cloud, and what kind of applications do banks want to retain amongst themselves, right? So the reason I've just picked both of you is just, one person from the consulting background and one from our banking fraternity, right? So.
Sure. Probably what I'll say could be a little controversial overall, but honestly, like, it probably is the mindset, right? So why don't we keep our money at home? Why do we keep it at the bank, right? So do I feel that my home is more secure? A bank may not be. After all, it's a question of perception, right? So there is and cloud is not like a mystical thing. It's actually a professionally run setup by extremely specialized people. So in all probability, one could even argue that the security on a cloud, if it is done well, could be even better. Just because of the fact that, as I said, there are 100+ applications running in your data center at all the time. It is very, very difficult to keep everything completely up to date, upgraded, latest patch, latest OS. And that itself can open up into a lot of vulnerabilities, right? So in my view, security is a fair concern, but it should be treated equally whether you do it in-house, private versus public, right? So that's an overarching story on security. But having said that, there is still more a question of control, how much we want to keep it directly within our control and not in our control, and so on and so forth. But the general trend that we have seen in adoption is people are looking for like digital first applications where most of your customer data, customer engagement platforms are anyways on cloud. Most of the popular software platforms are giving cloud-based options there, right? So those are the things which are moving a lot more quicker. Sure. Your support functions like HR, finance are moving a lot more quicker. Your third-party engagement product/platforms like bill discounting, etc., are moving quicker. So that's a broad theme that we are seeing as to what is moving quicker. But as you rightly said, Abhijit being there, having tackled this day in and day out, would have its own views.
Thanks. So, I mean, of course, you started with a controversial view, so I would continue with that. So, I mean, three important things. One is the cost, the security, and the regulatory compliance, right? You touched upon security, but look at it. I mean, what all things a cloud can offer? Can I build it in my private cloud if I virtualize my network? I mean, we have all the skill. I mean, it's not that it is a very difficult thing to do. So one is setting up your own private cloud where you have your core banking, which is kind of, you don't want to kind of put it outside the boundary. And something which I said, which is a compute intense, which you need the computing power in the cloud, you can certainly go out. Another aspect is, I mean, it can be debated again, but the cost part of it. So is it cost effective? I mean, personally, I feel I'm still good with a private cloud rather than going to a public cloud. I mean, I'm still far more better, cost effective than going in a public cloud. And that's my personal view, but just want to put that across.
Yeah. So I'm sure that's probably your personal view because others may have a different point of view. So that's absolutely fine. And you've already covered the part on cost, so you probably read my mind. I was actually, my next part was to really, ask about what's your view on the cost, right? So moving forward, I'll, Milind Varirkar, right? So Milind, I got your surname right, and I would like to ask you about, primarily looking at investments on data center, right? The companies have been used to really logically partitioning. Banks have been used to logically partitioning data and their applications in the data center, and the emergence of cloud has started over the years. So, in your view, cutting it the long story short, so what's your view? Are you looking at Are you more prone towards data centers by itself and banks managing their own computing network and storage? Or are you looking at hybrid models and moving workloads onto the cloud? What's your view?
As I said earlier, that data center is a long-term investment, and you need to really build in the resources. It's not only the capex part of it, but also the manageability. I mean, for banks, it becomes a challenge to acquire those skill sets and retain them over a long period to manage security, to manage various aspects of data center, including database and host of other things. And cloud definitely has presented an opportunity for all the data center managers. And again, it depends on, as Mr. Mankikar said, it depends on each bank and their risk appetite. Based on that, they look at the cloud services. And while doing that, a lot of aspects should be considered, like what applications can be moved to cloud, what applications you already have which are cloud ready, or some of the applications like core banking, which are very transaction heavy, that banks still prefer to have in-house data centers. So this trend, in my view, will continue. Some of the applications which are transaction heavy, needs to be more secured, will continue to be hosted out of data centers, and the applications which are agile, which needs agility, wherein you need to increase the resources for a particular period of time, like month-end processes or something like that. That people will start looking at cloud-based solutions.
So very interesting perspectives that we've really come across over the last 35 to 40 minutes.